It starts like any other day, just a quiet evening walk through the neighborhood. But when four reckless men decide to target the wrong black woman, thinking no one will care, they set off a chain of events they never saw coming. What they didn't know is, she isn't walking alone. By her side is her fiercely loyal dog, trained to protect and ready to fight. This isn't just another story about intimidation or fear. This is about standing your ground when the world expects you to fold. It's about loyalty, courage, and a woman who refuses to let hate win. What happens next is a showdown you won't believe. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very last second to see how it all unfolds. Before we dive in, do us a favor, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from and what time you're tuning in. We love hearing from all of you. Now, sit back, get comfortable, because this story, it's just getting started. There's something almost magical about the Florida Keys at sunset. The way the sky stretches out in soft pinks and fiery oranges, like it's trying to remind you that even after a long day, there's still beauty left to be seen. That's what Claudine Freeman told herself every single evening as she tied the laces on her walking shoes, grabbed Valor's leash, and stepped outside into the salty breeze that had become so familiar to her over the years. Claudine wasn't just anyone. She was known around the neighborhood as Mrs. Freeman, the retired school principal with the sharp eyes and kind smile. She'd spent nearly 4 decades guiding kids through their early years, making sure they knew their worth, even if the world tried to convince them otherwise. But retirement hadn't slowed her down, not one bit. In fact, it had only given her more time to do the one thing she loved, the most: taking long, peaceful walks with Valor by her side. Valor. That dog wasn't just a pet. He was family. A Belgian Malinois with intelligent amber eyes and a body built like a soldier's. Because that's exactly what he was trained to be. Her late husband, Raymond, had spent most of his life training military dogs for the army. Valor had been one of his last projects before cancer took him too soon. And when the military decided Valor wasn't combat ready anymore, Claudine brought him home. Raymond used to say, "He's not just muscle, Claudine. He's got heart. That dog'll give his life for the one he loves." Claudine believed that with all her heart, and Valor proved it every single day. Whether it was sitting quietly at her feet as she read on the porch, or standing tall and watchful when strangers passed by a little too slowly, that evening felt like any other. The sea breeze was gentle. The sound of boats returning to the docks hummed softly in the distance. Claudine adjusted the small gold chain around her neck, the one holding Raymond's old army dog tags. She wore them every day, not because they were worth anything to anyone else, but because they were priceless to her. They carried her history, her love, her strength. "Ready, boy?" she whispered, clipping Valor's leash to his collar. The dog's tail gave a single, steady wag like he understood every word. The two of them set off down the cracked sidewalk, weaving through streets lined with palm trees and old beach houses that had weathered more storms than she could count. Neighbors waved politely from their porches. Some smiled, some didn't. That was life in Key Largo. Claudine had lived here long enough to know who truly saw her, and who just looked right through her. But she never let that stop her from walking proud. Tonight, the air felt just a little heavier, like something was hanging there, waiting. But Claudine brushed the thought aside. She'd spent years learning to trust her instincts, but sometimes you just want to believe it's all in your head. They reached the edge of the neighborhood where the marina met the open water. It was Claudine's favorite spot, a quiet place where the ocean seemed to stretch on forever. She leaned against the wooden railing for a moment, watching the waves lap gently against the docks. Valor sat beside her, ears perked, nose twitching as if reading something in the air she couldn't sense. That's when she heard it, the low rumble of a truck engine creeping up behind them. Not fast, not loud, just lingering. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart sinking just a little when she saw the vehicle. Bright red, big tires. Fire department logo slapped across the side. Locals knew that truck well. It belonged to Chase Grady and his Kruth volunteer firefighters, who acted like they owned the entire island. They were loud, arrogant, and dangerous in the kind of way people didn't talk about out loud. The kind of men who carried entitlement on their shoulders like a badge. Claudine turned back toward the water, trying not to let her pulse quicken. Valor stood, his body tense now, sensing her shift in energy. She tightened her grip on his leash without thinking. The truck didn't drive past like it should have. Number. It stopped, parked right behind her, just a little too close for comfort. She could hear the doors creak open, the sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement, laughter low and mean carried on the wind. Claudine straightened her spine, refusing to turn around. Not yet. She took a slow, deep breath, steadying herself. Because she knew, somewhere deep in her bones, this wasn't just another walk. Something was coming. And whatever it was, she was ready. Trouble doesn't always announce itself with sirens or shouting. Sometimes it creeps up in casual conversations, whispered plans, or worse-twisted intentions dressed up like harmless jokes. That's exactly how it started with Chase Grady and his crew. While Claudine and Valor walked toward the edge of the marina that evening, Chase and his boys had been parked a few blocks away, leaning against that bright red fire truck, tossing empty beer cans into the bed like it was just another Friday night. But this wasn't just another night for them. Chase had been running his mouth for weeks, telling anyone who'd listen that he was tired of seeing people like her walking around the neighborhood like they belonged. Tired of the way she carried herself head high, back straight, not afraid of anyone. That's what burned him up the most. The pride. The nerve. The fact that Claudine Freeman never once bowed her head when she crossed paths with him or his crew. She thinks she's too good for the rest of us, Chase sneered, lighting a cigarette and flicking the match into the street. She's just an old lady, man, Wyatt muttered from the driver's seat, glancing nervously toward the houses nearby. What's the point? But Chase wasn't interested in reason. He was interested in control. You don't get it, do you? Chase leaned into the truck window, lowering his voice. It's not about her. It's about sending a message. People around here need to remember who runs this town. We're the ones who show up when their houses catch fire. We're the ones they call when things go bad. And what do we get for it? People like her acting like we don't matter. Mason let out a low laugh, cracking his knuckles. What's the plan, boss? We gonna scare her a little? Chase grinned, leaning back. We're gonna take that necklace she wears every day, the one with the military tags. I hear she wears it like it's worth $1 million. Let's see how proud she walks after that's gone. Zeke shifted uncomfortably, his voice barely more than a whisper. You sure about this? I mean, she's harmless. Chase turned on him fast, jabbing a finger into Zeke's chest. That's the point. She's harmless. What's she gonna do? Call the sheriff? We are the sheriff's boys. Nobody's gonna do a damn thing. The crew exchanged glances, some uneasy, some excited. Chase could feel the shift. He had them right where he wanted them. Men like Chase thrived on that kind of influence. He knew how to push buttons, how to turn hesitation into action. And tonight, he was itching to remind everyone just how far his reach stretched. Look, Chase continued, his voice dripping with false confidence. We ain't gonna hurt her unless she makes us. We walk up, take the chain, scare her a little, and bounce. Easy. No one's gonna care. They'll probably laugh about it at the bar by tomorrow night. Mason nodded, slamming the truck door shut. Let's get it done then. The engine rumbled to life, and the truck crept down the street, slow and deliberate. Chase sat in the passenger seat, watching as the marina came into view. His grin widened when he spotted Claudine standing there, looking out over the water like she owned the place. He hated that. Hated the way she never seemed small, never seemed afraid. She's got that damn dog with her again, Zeke muttered under his breath. Good, Chase shot back. Makes it more fun. As they rolled closer, Chase noticed Claudine glance back for just a second, then turn away like she didn't have a care in the world. That alone made his blood boil. Who did she think she was? He slapped the dashboard, laughing cruelly. Look at her, acting like she doesn't even see us. Well, she's about to. The truck came to a stop just a few feet away from the pier. One by one, the men climbed out, boots crunching against the gravel as they spread out. They didn't shout, they didn't rush, they didn't have to. Chase knew the silence was worse. The kind of silence that told you something bad was about to happen. Claudine stood there, her back still to them. That dog of hers, Valor, was already on alert. Chase could see the way its ears twitched, the way it shifted its weight, like it was ready to spring into action. Good, Chase thought. Let the old woman think that Mutt can save her. Evening, ma'am, Chase called out, his voice sickly sweet. Out kinda late for a woman your age, don't you think? The others snickered behind him, closing in just a little more. Chase could feel the adrenaline kick in. This was it. This was the moment they'd remind everyone that Claudine Freeman wasn't untouchable, not in his town. And in that moment, Chase Grady made the worst mistake of his life. He picked the wrong woman to mess with. Valor felt it first. His body stiffened under Claudine's hand before she even heard the footsteps. It was the way his ears shot up, the way a low, rumbling growl started deep in his chest. Not loud, not yet, but low enough that Claudine knew something was coming. She didn't turn around right away. Number. She'd learned long ago that giving fear your attention too quickly only gave it more power. Instead, she placed her hand gently on Valor's back, leaned in close to his ear, and whispered, "Easy now, boy. Just easy." But it wasn't easy. Not tonight. The sound of boots crunching the gravel behind her sent chills racing down her spine. 4 sets of boots, slow and heavy. Each step felt like a countdown. Chase Grady's voice sliced through the evening air like a blade. Well, what's the rush, Mrs. Freeman? Beautiful night, isn't it?" Claudine closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself. She felt the weight of Raymond's dog tags resting against her chest. She took a breath, steady and slow, then finally turned around to face them. There they were, 4 men standing just a little too close. Broad shoulders. Smirks that didn't reach their eyes. The kind of men who thought the world owed them something. And right in the middle of them, Chase Grady, arms crossed, head tilted like he already knew how this would end. Claudine felt her heartbeat thump in her ears, but she didn't flinch. She didn't back down. Instead, she squared her shoulders and met Chase's gaze head-on. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, like she was greeting someone at Sunday service instead of a pack of jackals. Mason let out a mocking laugh. "Look at her. So polite." Wyatt stayed quiet, glancing toward the truck like he was already regretting being there. Zeke shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to break from the pack. Chase took a step forward, nodding toward the chain around her neck. "That's a nice piece you got there, ma'am. Thought we'd come take a closer look." Valor let out a sharper growl this time, lips curling back just enough to show his teeth. Claudine tightened her grip on his leash, grounding herself in that familiar tension humming through his body. "You can admire it from right where you're standing," she replied, her voice low but firm. Chase laughed, shaking his head like she'd just told the best joke he'd heard all year. "Feisty," he muttered, turning to Mason. "Ain't she something?" The others chuckled under their breath, and Chase took another step closer. Claudine felt Valor press against her leg, ready. He wasn't just posturing anymore. He was waiting for her word, waiting for permission. But Claudine knew how quickly things could spiral. She had to buy time, had to stay calm. She took a step back, easing toward the narrow walkway that led off the pier and back toward the main road. But Wyatt moved first, stepping wide and blocking the exit with a grin that didn't quite reach his nervous eyes. "Where you headed, ma'am?" he asked, voice low. Claudine swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She knew this game, knew they wanted her to panic, to run, but she wasn't running, not tonight. "Just out for some air," she answered, her voice never wavering. "Same as every other evening, and I suggest you boys let me keep walking." Mason cracked his knuckles again, that hungry look returning to his face. "Or what? You gonna call your dog on us?" Claudine tilted her head just slightly, never breaking eye contact. "If I have to," Chase smirked, stepping even closer now, invading her space. "Lady, I don't think you realize who you're talking to." "Oh, I realize," she replied coldly. "But you're the one who doesn't realize who you're dealing with." The tension thickened, hanging in the air like the weight of a coming storm. Claudine could feel Valor trembling slightly, not with fear but with restraint. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Chase leaned in close, lowering his voice to a whisper only she could hear. "No one's gonna care what happens to you out here." Claudine felt something inside her snap not with panic, but with resolve. She knew that's what they believed. Knew they thought she didn't matter. That no one would care if she disappeared into the dark. But they were wrong. So very wrong. She lifted her chin, her voice like steel. "You picked the wrong woman," she whispered back. For a moment, Chase didn't move. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, And then, like a switch, flipped, he reached out, fingers curling toward the chain around her neck. It was all happening fast now. Too fast. But Claudine didn't flinch. She whispered two simple words. "Valor, watch." In a flash, Valor's body tensed, moving like a loaded gun ready to fire. His growl deepened, rattling the night air like distant thunder. But Chase didn't back down. "Number?" He grinned wider. And lunged. It all happened in the span of a heartbeat. Chase Grady lunged, his hand reaching out like a striking snake, aiming straight for the chain around Claudine's neck. But Valor was faster. The second Claudine whispered that single word, "Watch," he moved like lightning. His powerful frame surged forward, planting himself between Claudine and the outstretched hand of the man who dared to touch what didn't belong to him. His growl didn't sound like it belonged to any ordinary dog. No, it sounded like something pulled from deep in the earth. A primal warning that stopped even Mason in his tracks. Chase froze just inches away from Claudine, staring down into the bared teeth of a dog who wasn't bluffing. Claudine didn't move. She didn't blink. She knew Valor, knew exactly how far he'd go. And she also knew these men hadn't figured it out yet. Chase tried to play it off with a breathy laugh, pulling his hand back slowly, like he still held all the power. "Look at this big bad mutt," he sneered, stepping sideways to circle her. "Looks mean, but I bet he's just all bark. Ain't that right, sweetheart?" He spat the word sweetheart like it was poison. Mason shifted, bouncing on the balls of his feet, ready to back Chase up. Wyatt glanced toward the street again, rubbing his sweaty palms on his jeans. Zeke just stood there, swallowing hard like he knew they'd already pushed too far. But Chase wasn't done. He leaned in closer again, this time lowering his voice to that same poisonous whisper. "You think that dog's gonna save you? You think anyone gives a damn what happens to you out here?" Claudine tightened her grip on Valor's leash, her jaw locking. "I don't need saving," she replied coldly. "And I'm not the one who should be scared." Her words hit Chase harder than a punch to the gut. He laughed again, short, sharp, and angry. Then he turned his attention to Valor, pointing straight at the dog's face. "This mutt don't scare me." Claudine felt Valor's body tremble again, not with fear, but with the effort it took to hold himself back. She could feel the tension rising in the air like a boiling pot about to overflow. Chase leaned closer, dropping his voice even lower. "Last chance, lady," he hissed. "Hand it over." Claudine knew she could hand over the necklace, knew she could let them take it, maybe walk away without getting hurt. But it wasn't about the necklace anymore. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about dignity. It was about standing tall when the world tried to make you small. She let out a slow breath, her eyes locked on Chase's clothes. "Number." One word, that's all it took. Mason moved first. Without warning, he lunged toward her left side, fast and aggressive, like he thought she wouldn't see it coming. But Valor did. The dog shot forward with terrifying precision, snapping his teeth just inches from Mason's arm, forcing the man to stumble backward with a startled curse. "Son of a—" Mason growled, shaking his hand like he couldn't believe how close Valor had come. Wyatt flinched, clearly regretting ever getting involved. Zeke took another nervous step back, but Chase doubled down. "That's it," Chase spat. "You want to play tough? Fine. We'll do it the hard way." He waved his hand, signaling the others to spread out, to close the circle. Claudine's heart raced, but her face stayed cold, unreadable. She took a step back, positioning herself closer to the pier railing. No more room to retreat. She could feel Valor's body pulling against the leash, his breathing sharp and quick. She knew he was ready, but she wasn't ready to give him the signal just yet. "Think about what you're doing," she warned again, her voice loud enough to carry down the pier. "Walk away now. And you might still have some dignity left." But Chase wasn't listening. He couldn't hear anything over the sound of his own pride. "No one's watching, old lady," he sneered. "Ain't nobody gonna save you." Claudine glanced to her right, toward the small security camera mounted above the bait shop door just a few yards away. It had been there for years. She didn't know if it still worked, didn't know if anyone on the other side was paying attention, but she made sure Chase saw her looking. He followed her gaze, then rolled his eyes. "Yeah, real scary," he mocked. "You think that old junk camera's gonna stop us?" Claudine turned back to him, her voice cutting sharp through the heavy air. "Number, but my dog will." Chase lunged again, this time faster, more reckless. And Claudine didn't hesitate. "Valor, get him." In a blur of muscle and fury, Valor exploded forward. His leash slipped from Claudine's hand, but she didn't care. She knew what was coming. Chase never even had time to react. Valor hit him square in the chest like a freight train, knocking him off balance. The two of them crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. Valor's teeth bared just inches from Chase's face. The air filled with the sound of snapping jaws and terrified shouts. Chase's boys stood frozen for a split second, their bravado draining from their faces as they watched their leader pinned beneath a dog they'd stupidly underestimated. And Claudine? She stood there, breathing hard, eyes locked on the scene in front of her. Because this was the moment they realized they'd picked the wrong woman and the wrong dog. It should have ended right there. It really should have. Chase Grady pinned to the ground by a dog he never thought was a threat. Claudine standing over them both like a pillar that couldn't be shaken. But men like Chase never know when to stop. Even with Valor's teeth snapping just inches from his throat, Chase's eyes burned with something ugly humiliation. He'd built his whole identity on the idea that he ran this town, that people feared him, that no one, especially not an old black woman with a dog, would ever stand up to him in public. And now here he was, face down, breathing hard, with his boys standing around not knowing what to do. "Get this dog off!" he roared, spitting gravel as he thrashed beneath Valor's weight. Valor didn't move. His body stayed low, his teeth bared, a deep, vibrating growl rising from his chest. One move from Chase, and those jaws would snap shut like a bear trap. Mason started to step forward, his fists clenched, but Claudine raised a hand like she was directing traffic. Her voice, low and steady, cut through the chaos like a razor blade. "Don't you take another step." Mason froze mid-stride. His jaw clenched so tight you could almost hear his teeth grinding. Claudine took a slow, deliberate step closer to Chase, standing over him now. She leaned down just enough so he could hear every word. "I warned you," she said coldly. "You thought I was bluffing. You thought this dog was just for show." Chase's face turned beet red. He let out another strained growl as he tried to shove Valor off with his forearm, but Valor didn't budge. And then Mason lost it. With a shout, he lunged forward, swinging his boot toward Valor's side. It was sloppy, reckless, like a man who'd already lost control but didn't care about the consequences. The second that boot lifted off the ground, Valor snapped. Faster than anyone could react, the dog spun, jaws locking onto Mason's pant leg just below the knee. Mason let out a howl, stumbling back as Valor yanked, nearly toppling him over. Wyatt shouted something, voice cracking like he didn't really want to be there anymore. "Zeke?" Zeke turned pale as a ghost. Stepping back so far, he nearly tripped over the pier railing. Claudine knew the moment was slipping into something more dangerous. These boys had come looking for trouble, but they'd bitten off more than they could chew. Now their fear was turning into desperation. And desperate men did stupid things. Valor released Mason's leg with a violent shake, sending the man crashing onto his back, cursing and gasping for air. Chase tried to scramble to his feet again, but Valor turned on him so fast that Chase fell flat on his stomach with a grunt, covering his head with his arms. Claudine raised her voice, sharper now, cutting through the rising panic like a hammer on glass. "I said stop." The doc went dead silent for half a second. Even Valor froze, muscles twitching with energy he barely held back. Claudine pointed at Chase, her voice steady, unshaken. "You had your chance to walk away. All of you did. But you couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Chase let out a frustrated snarl, muffled by the planks of the dock. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You think you're going to stand there and humiliate me in front of my crew?" Claudine crossed her arms. "You humiliated yourself." And that's when Mason did the thing Claudine feared most. He pulled a knife. The silver blade flashed under the dock light, trembling in his shaking hand. "Back off, lady," Mason hissed, climbing to his feet with a limp. "Or I swear to God, I'll gut that dog of yours right here." Claudine's breath hitched for just a second. Not because she believed Mason had the guts to do it, but because she knew cornered men didn't always think before they acted. She dropped her voice to a deadly whisper. "You take one step toward him, Mason Burke, and you'll find out just how wrong you are." Valor's growl deepened, ears pinned back, every muscle locked and ready. Mason shifted his weight, gripping the knife tighter. Chase, still flat on the ground, barked orders through clenched teeth. "Do it, Mason, take the dog." But before Mason could move, before anyone could blink, Claudine raised her hand toward the street behind them. The sound that followed shattered everything. Sirens. Not just one, two, three, getting louder by the second. Blue and red lights splashed across the marina like someone had flipped a switch on a lighthouse. The boys turned their heads in panic, eyes wide as the sheriff's cruisers rolled up fast, tires squealing against the pavement. Deputy Rachel Cole stepped out of the lead car, hand already on her holstered sidearm. "Drop the knife, hands where I can see them." Mason froze like he'd been struck by lightning, his face twisted in pure panic. The knife clattered to the ground. Claudine didn't move. She didn't need to. Valor stood his ground, still growling, still guarding. Rachel advanced quickly, weapon drawn but steady. "Step away from the woman," she commanded. "Right now." Wyatt bolted first, turning on his heel and sprinting for the fire truck like a coward. Zeke followed, practically tripping over himself as he scrambled after Wyatt. Chase, still pinned on the ground, tried to push himself up again, but Rachel was on him in seconds, slamming him back down with her knee pressed into his back. "You've got nowhere to go, Grady," she hissed, cuffing his wrists behind his back. Mason stood frozen, shaking, staring at the squad cars like he couldn't believe what was happening. "On your knees," Rachel ordered. He didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He just dropped. Claudine stood there, chest heaving, watching as the pieces of Chase's crew scattered like rats. But Valor? Valor didn't move an inch. He just stood there, between Claudine and the danger, exactly where he was meant to be. And Claudine? She knew this was far from over. But for tonight, they'd won. Word spreads fast in a small town, faster than the wind off the coast, faster than gossip at a church picnic. By sunrise the next morning, everybody in Key Largo had heard the story, whether they wanted to believe it or not. Some folks whispered about how Claudine Freeman and her killer dog had taken down the town's golden boys. Others claimed they'd seen it all themselves, spinning the tale like it was some local legend in the making. But most just stayed quiet, waiting to see how the dust would settle. Claudine, however, had no time for whispers. She had barely slept. The adrenaline from the night before still coursed through her veins like wildfire. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Valor's growl, heard the snap of that knife hitting the dock, heard the sirens cutting through the air like Judgment Day had come early. She sat on her front porch that morning, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, staring down the empty street like she was daring the world to test her again. Valor lay at her feet, calm but watchful, his ears twitching at every sound. Claudine knew he was still on edge. Hell, they both were. It didn't take long before the stares started. First, it was the older couple from 3 houses down, walking their little poodle like clockwork every morning. They crossed to the other side of the street when they saw Claudine on the porch. No wave, no smile. Just quick glances over their shoulders like they didn't know what to make of her anymore. Then it was Pastor Green's wife, slowing her car just enough to stare through the window as she drove by, like Claudine had somehow become a stranger overnight. Claudine didn't flinch. She'd seen this kind of thing before. Folks who'd sit in the same pew with you on Sunday but cross the street to avoid you on Monday. It was the same old dance, just wearing a different mask this time. By noon, she had to get out of the house. She leashed up Valor and headed toward the town market. Not because she needed groceries, but because she needed to remind herself that this was still her home, that they didn't get to take that from her too. The market was already buzzing by the time she arrived, tourists picking through tropical fruits, locals catching up by the seafood counter. But as soon as Claudine stepped through the door, a hush seemed to follow her like a shadow. Heads turned, conversations slowed. She kept her chin high, her steps steady. Valor trotted beside her like a soldier on patrol. Together, they moved through the aisles, like they owned every inch of that floor. She was halfway through the produce section when she heard it. "Mrs. Freeman?" The voice was soft, hesitant. Claudine turned to see Janice Wilkins, a woman she'd known for years, a woman who'd once baked her a pound cake after Raymond's funeral, a woman who used to wave every time she passed Claudine's house. Janice stood there, clutching her purse like it might run away from her. I heard about what happened," Janice whispered, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to hear. "Are you all right?" Claudine looked her dead in the eye. "I'm standing here, aren't I?" Janice flinched a little but nodded quickly. Of course you are." It's just such a shame, isn't it? Young men these days, they just don't think. Claudine felt her jaw tighten. No, she replied, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. They thought. They knew exactly what they were doing. Janice's smile faltered. She shifted her weight like she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she gave a tight nod, mumbled something about praying for her, and disappeared down the next aisle without looking back. Claudine stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding louder than she expected. That's when she realized it wasn't over, not even close. Because this town didn't want to admit what really happened. It was easier to call it a shame or a misunderstanding. Easier to pretend Chase and his crew were just boys being boys, instead of men who'd nearly dragged her into something much darker. Claudine gritted her teeth and finished her shopping in silence. Every stare, every whisper. Every sideways glance only fueled the fire building in her chest. By the time she got home, her phone was already ringing. She set the grocery bags down on the kitchen table and answered without checking the caller ID. Mrs. Freeman? The voice on the other end was familiar, firm, but respectful. Deputy Rachel Cole. Yes? Claudine replied, bracing herself for whatever came next. I just wanted to give you a heads up, Rachel continued. The town's buzzing. Folks are already taking sides. Some are defending you, but some are downplaying the whole thing, saying it wasn't as bad as it looks. Claudine let out a dry, bitter laugh. Of course they are. I just thought you should know, Rachel added. You might hear some things you don't like. Just be careful. Claudine glanced down at Valor, who was already sitting by her side, head resting on her foot like he'd been listening the whole time. I'm not scared, she said quietly. I didn't think you were, Rachel replied, but you're not alone in this. If you need anything, you call me. You hear? Claudine hung up the phone with a long sigh, her mind already spinning. She knew she'd only just stepped into the storm, and something told her it was about to get a whole lot worse before it ever got better. But as she looked down at Valor steady, loyal, unshaken, Claudine knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Later that night, the quiet was louder than ever. Claudine sat on her porch again, staring down the same street she'd walked 1,000 times before. But it didn't feel the same anymore. No, not after what happened. Not after the way people looked at her in the store. Not after the way some crossed the street like she carried trouble in her pockets. It didn't matter that she'd done nothing wrong. It didn't matter that she'd defended herself. It didn't even matter that the law had shown up and seen it all firsthand. People had already decided which version of the story they liked best. And Claudine knew from experience, once people start twisting the truth, there's no telling how far they'll bend it. She glanced down at Valor, who was lying at her feet like always, his ears twitching every time a car passed. He hadn't fully relaxed since that night. He could feel it too. The shift, the weight in the air? Claudine leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warm Florida night settle around her. But it didn't bring peace. Not tonight. She thought about that knife, about how close Mason had come to crossing a line that couldn't be undone, and that's when it hit her. What if they came back? What if Chase's boys weren't done? What if next time it wasn't just threats and fists? Claudine sat up straighter, scanning the street again. She told herself she was being cautious. But deep down, she knew it was fear trying to sneak into her chest, and she hated it. She was still lost in thought when her phone rang again. Unknown number. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told her to answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, confident. Mrs. Freeman? This is Assistant District Attorney Marcos Villanueva. I'm the prosecutor assigned to your case. Claudine exhaled slowly, standing up from her chair and pacing toward the edge of her porch. About time someone from the courthouse called me, she replied. Villanueva chuckled softly on the other end, like he understood exactly how long she'd been waiting to hear from someone who wasn't afraid to say the word justice out loud. I've been reviewing the report, he continued, and the footage from that marina security camera. It's pretty damning. Claudine's jaw tightened. You've seen the tape? Front to back, Villanueva replied. It's all there. Chase Grady and his crew surrounding you, threatening you. That dog of yours, what's his name? Valor, Claudine answered softly, glancing down at her partner still lying on the porch. Yeah, Valor, Villanueva repeated. I've seen a lot in my time, Mrs. Freeman, but I've never seen a dog hold his ground like that. He saved your life." Claudine swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "He did more than that," she whispered. There was a pause on the other end, like Villanueva was choosing his next words carefully. "Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this," he finally said. "You've made some people nervous. Chase and his boys? They've got friends in this town. People who've been covering for them for years. Some of those people, they're already pushing back, trying to paint this whole thing like it was just a misunderstanding." Claudine let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. I need you to understand something," Villanueva continued. "This case, it's bigger than you, bigger than them. If we take this to trial, it's going to put a lot of people under a spotlight they've been hiding from for years." Claudina didn't hesitate. "Good," she snapped. "Let them sweat." Villanueva paused again, then let out a slow breath. "I was hoping you'd say that." Claudine paced the porch again, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders like a heavy coat. She stopped at the edge, staring out into the dark. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Testify," Villanueva replied. "Stand up there in front of the whole town and tell them exactly what happened. Don't hold back. Don't let them twist it." Claudine nodded slowly. She could already hear the whispers, already feel the stares. But she knew what she had to do. "I'll be there," she promised. Villanueva's voice softened. "I believe you will." After they hung up, Claudine stood there for a long moment, gripping the railing so tight her knuckles turned white. She knew what this meant. There'd be more whispers, more stares, more people trying to make her feel small. But she wasn't small, and neither was Valor. She looked down at him again, smiling for the first time that day. "You hear that, boy?" she whispered. "We're not done yet." Valor's ears perked, his tail giving a slow, steady wag like he already knew. They were just getting started. The sun had barely started to set the next evening when Claudine stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the same light blue cardigan she wore almost every Sunday. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't loud, but it felt right, like armor that didn't look like armor. Valor sat by the door, watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. He always knew when something was different, and tonight, everything felt different. Claudine grabbed her phone, slipped it into her purse, and clipped Valor's leash to his collar. The routine felt familiar, steadying. But nothing about tonight was ordinary. She wasn't going for a peaceful walk this time. She was going to the Marineth place where it had all started. The place where Chase Grady had tried to tear away not just her necklace, but her dignity. And somehow, it felt like the right place to start taking it back. The streets were quieter than usual, a little too quiet. Like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. As she neared the marina, Claudine spotted the same old bait shop, the same crooked sign swinging in the breeze. And right above it, the little security camera that had caught everything. She knew Villanueva had the footage, knew the courtroom would see it soon enough. But being back here, standing in the very spot where it all went down, it felt heavier in person. Valor stopped at her side, his body tense again. Claudine followed his gaze. There, leaning against the same red fire truck parked just a block down, stood Wyatt and Zeke, her jaw clenched. Of course, they were back, like nothing had happened, like they still owned the ground they stood on. She kept walking, head high, her grip on Valor's leash tightening. Wyatt spotted her first. He nudged Zeke, who turned pale the second his eyes landed on her. They didn't call out this time. They didn't smirk or laugh. No, they just watched. Claudine knew they weren't brave without Chase leading the charge. They were cowards. Rats without a ship. But cowards could still be dangerous. She walked past them without flinching, without slowing down. But deep down, her heart was racing like a drumline in her chest. She reached the end of the dock and turned around, leaning on the railing just like she had that night. Valor sat at her feet, still and alert, his ears twitching at every movement. Minutes passed, long heavy minutes, and then, like clockwork, they started walking toward her, Wyatt first, Zeke trailing just a step behind. Claudina didn't move. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Wyatt stopped a few feet away, shifting his weight like a man who wasn't sure if he was about to fight or run. "We ain't here to start nothing," he muttered. Claudine raised an eyebrow. "Could have fooled me." Zeke glanced around nervously, like he was checking for witnesses. Wyatt shoved his hands in his pockets, staring down at the planks beneath his boots. "Look, Chase, he was out of line. We all were." Claudine crossed her arms, keeping her voice ice cold. You just figuring that out now? Wyatt swallowed hard. We didn't know he was going to go that far. Claudine leaned forward just slightly, locking eyes with him. Yes, you did. Wyatt flinched, but she wasn't finished. You stood there. You watched. You blocked my way when I tried to leave. You didn't say a damn thing when he grabbed me. Don't you dare stand here and pretend you didn't know. Zeke opened his mouth to speak, but Wyatt cut him off with a shaky breath. We wanted to tell you we're done. We ain't part of this anymore. We told Mason. We told Chase. We're out. Claudine narrowed her eyes. You think walking away now makes you innocent? Wyatt looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. No, he whispered. But we ain't coming after you. That's all I'm saying. Claudine let the silence sit heavy between them. You tell Chase, you tell Mason, I'm not running, she finally said. I'll see them in court, and when I do, you'll be right there with them. Wyatt's face crumbled. Zeke's eyes darted to the street again. We're done here, Claudine added, her voice steady as stone. Go. And they did. They turned and walked back to their truck without another word. Claudine watched them go, knowing in her gut that their story wasn't over. Not yet. She turned back toward the water, letting the breeze hit her face like a cleansing wave. Valor pressed against her leg, sensing the shift. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur. That's right, boy, she whispered. Let him run. But deep down, Claudine knew who wasn't running. Chase Grady. And it wouldn't be long before he made his next move. She just didn't know how far he'd go, or how much more she'd have to lose before it was over. But one thing was certain. Valor would be ready, and so would she. Chase Grady wasn't finished. Claudine could feel it in her bones. You don't bruise a man's ego like that and expect him to crawl away quietly. Especially not a man like Chase. No, humiliation like that festers. It sits in a man's gut like a fire that won't burn out until something or someone gets scorched. And sure enough, just a few days later, the quiet shattered all over again. It started the same way as before. A low rumble. A truck engine lingering just a little too long outside Claudine's house. She was standing in her kitchen, drying a coffee mug, when Valor lifted his head from the floor. His ears perked, and that same low growl rolled through his chest. Claudine didn't even have to look. She knew. She stepped to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see them. There it was, that same red fire truck. Only this time, Chase wasn't in the passenger seat. He was driving, alone. No Wyatt. No Zeke. No Mason. Just Chase, leaning back in the driver's seat like he had all the time in the world. Like he was daring her to come outside. Claudine stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding so loud she swore she could hear it echo in her ears. But she didn't move. She didn't give him the satisfaction. Valor stood up, pressing his body against her leg, ready for whatever came next. After what felt like an eternity, Chase finally threw the truck into gear and peeled away from the curb, tires squealing against the pavement. But Claudine knew what that meant. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She picked up her phone and called Deputy Rachel Cole. He was here, Claudine said as soon as Rachel answered. Rachel didn't ask who. She didn't have to. Did he get out of the truck? Rachel asked, voice sharp. No, Claudine replied. But he wanted me to know he was watching. Rachel let out a breath. Stay put. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, Rachel pulled up out front. She didn't come alone. 2 more deputies rolled in right behind her, lights off but ready for anything. Claudine met her on the porch, Valor never leaving her side. We need to make this official, Rachel said, her voice firm. You've got every right to file a restraining order. I can have the paperwork started tonight. Claudine nodded, but deep down she knew a piece of paper wouldn't stop a man like Chase Grady. Still, it was a start. While Rachel filled out the paperwork on the hood of her cruiser, Valor paced the porch, restless. Claudine kept her eyes on the street, waiting for that truck to come back around. But it didn't. Not that night. Rachel promised to keep a patrol car nearby for the next few days, but Claudine could see it in her eyes. Rachel knew as well as she did that Chase wasn't the type to wait long. And sure enough, she was right. The next evening, Claudine took Valor out for their usual walk, sticking close to the main road, staying under the streetlights. She was halfway down Pelican Drive when she heard footsteps behind her. Not the heavy stomp of boots this time, but something lighter, quicker, like someone trying not to be noticed. Claudine tightened her grip on Valor's leash and glanced over her shoulder. Mason, limping slightly, eyes wild, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a dirty hoodie. He wasn't with Chase. He wasn't with anyone. He was alone. Claudine felt every muscle in her body tense, but she kept walking, refusing to let him see the fear trying to claw its way up her throat. Mason called out, voice cracking like he hadn't spoken in days. "Hey, Mrs. Freeman!" Claudine didn't stop. "Wait! Wait up!" he hissed, jogging to catch up. Valor growled, his body pulling tight against the leash. Mason held his hands up, like that could somehow erase what he'd done. "Look, I'm not here to hurt you," Mason stammered, glancing around like he expected Chase to appear out of thin air. I need to talk." Claudine finally stopped, turning slowly to face him. She kept Valor in front of her like a wall between them. Mason's face twisted with something that looked almost like fear. "I'm done," he said, voice shaking. "I told Chase I was out, but he ain't gonna stop. He's losing it. He's talking about finishing what he started." Claudine's heart skipped. "He's gonna come after you again," Mason whispered, glancing around like the shadows might hear him. "And this time, he won't be alone." Claudine swallowed hard, keeping her voice steady. "Why are you telling me this?" Mason rubbed the back of his neck, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Because I don't want any part of it anymore, and I thought maybe, if I warned you, I don't know, maybe I could live with myself." Claudine didn't blink. "You think warning me erases what you did?" Mason flinched. "No," he whispered, "but it's all I got left." Before Claudine could respond, headlights turned the corner up ahead. A black pickup truck, slow, deliberate. Mason's face went pale. "Damn it, that's him," he hissed. "I gotta go." And just like that, he turned and ran, disappearing down the alley before Claudine could stop him. Claudine stood frozen for a second, her grip on Valor's leash tightening so hard her knuckles turned white. The truck didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. It just kept rolling past, windows too dark to see through. But she knew who it was. Chase Grady. And this time, he wasn't bluffing. Claudine didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. Every creak in the house sounded louder. Every car that passed felt like a threat rolling closer. She sat at the kitchen table, Valor curled up at her feet, both of them wide awake long after the town had gone quiet. Her mind kept replaying Mason's words on a loop. He's not gonna stop. He's losing it. He's coming back. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a promise. One she could feel tightening around her like a noose. By sunrise, Claudine had already made her decision. She grabbed her phone, scrolled down to Rachel Cole's number, and hit call. "Deputy Cole," Rachel answered, her voice tight with exhaustion, like she hadn't slept either. "It's me," Claudine said. "We need to finish that paperwork. Today." Rachel didn't hesitate. "I'm already in my car. Be there in 5. And she was. By 8 o'clock, Claudine was sitting in the sheriff's office, Valor lying obediently by her chair. Rachel sat across from her with a stack of paperwork and a pen, walking her through every line like she wasn't just filling out forms, like she was fortifying a wall between Claudine and the danger that was creeping closer by the hour. "We'll file for the restraining order first thing," Rachel said. "That'll put Chase on official notice. He comes within 100 feet of you. We'll lock him up so fast his head'll spin." Claudine sighed, pressing her fingers to her temple. "And you think a piece of paper's gonna stop him?" Rachel leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "No," she admitted, "but it gives us something solid to work with when he does cross the line." Claudine nodded. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Once the paperwork was done, Rachel stood and grabbed her keys. "Come on," she said. "We're making a stop." Claudine raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "The DA's office," Rachel replied. "It's time you met Marcos face to face." They didn't waste any time. The drive across town was tense and quiet. Claudine sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, watching the people on the sidewalks, the same people who used to wave without thinking, who now avoided eye contact like she was contagious. Rachel parked in front of a plain brick building with a small sign that read Monroe County District Attorney's Office. Inside, the air felt heavier than Claudine expected. She followed Rachel down a long hallway until they reached a door with a brass plate that read Assistant District Attorney Marcos Villanueva. Rachel knocked once before pushing the door open. "Mrs. Freeman," Villanueva greeted, standing up from behind his cluttered desk. He was taller than she expected, with kind but tired eyes, like a man who had seen too many good people chewed up by the system. "Nice to finally meet you in person," he added, offering his hand. Claudine shook it firmly, eyeing the stacks of folders on his desk. "You always this busy?" she asked. Villanueva chuckled softly. "In a place like this?" "Always." He motioned for her to sit, and Rachel leaned against the door, giving them some space. "I've read the reports, watched the footage, listened to your 911 call more times than I can count," Villanueva started. "But hearing it from you, that's what I need now." Claudine took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then she told him everything, every step, every word, every threat. From the moment she first heard the truck behind her, to the second Valor took Chase Grady to the ground. She didn't leave out a thing, not even the parts that made her voice shake or her hands clench. Villanueva listened without interrupting, nodding slowly as she spoke. When she finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "You're strong," he said softly. "Stronger than most people who sit in that chair." Claudine shook her head. "I'm tired. That's what I am." Villanueva nodded again. "Tired or not, you're the key to this case. Your testimony, the footage, the statements we've already gathered, it's all lining up. But I need you to know something, Mrs. Freeman." Claudine leaned in, bracing herself. "This trial, it's going to divide this town even more than it already has. You'll have people in your corner, but you'll also have people who'll do everything they can to tear you down." Claudine let out a dry laugh. "What else is new?" Villanueva smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I need to know you're ready to see this through," he said. Claudine didn't hesitate. "I've come too far to stop now." Villanueva leaned forward, dropping his voice to a near whisper. "Then we go all the way." Rachel stepped forward, placing a hand on Claudine's shoulder. "We've got your back," she promised. Claudine stood, squaring her shoulders. "Good," she said softly. "Because I'm not backing down." As she left the DA's office, Claudine felt something shift inside her. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was resolve. And this time, she was ready to fight with everything she had left. They say bad news travels fast. But in Key Largo, it wasn't just fast, it was wildfire. By the time Claudine left the district attorney's office, half the town already seemed to know the case was heading to trial. And just like Marcos warned, the town started to split in two. On one side were the folks Claudine never expected to stand with her, quiet neighbors who nodded a little deeper when they saw her. Strangers at the post office who whispered, "We're with you, Mrs. Freeman," before quickly looking away like they were afraid to be seen saying it too loud. But on the other side, there were the others, the ones who crossed their arms when she walked by, the ones who stopped talking the second she entered a store, the ones who whispered behind their hands, "It's gone too far, she's making it bigger than it was, they're just boys, for God's sake." Claudine heard it all, every word, every sideways glance. But nothing stung worse than what she heard that Friday night at Henderson's Market. She had just finished picking up a few things, milk, coffee, and a small bag of treats for Valor when she heard them. A group of men standing by the deli counter, their voices low, but their words cutting sharp like broken glass. "Whole town's turning upside down over this mess," one of them muttered. "You ask me," another replied. "She wanted it to happen. That woman's been looking for attention since her husband died." Claudine stopped dead in her tracks. "I mean, come on," the first man added with a laugh. "Chase and the boys were just messing around. Now she's got half the county ready to hang 'em like they're murderers." Claudine's grip tightened on her shopping basket. She knew those voices. She'd heard them 100 times before, at town meetings, at church picnics, even standing behind her in line at the coffee shop. But tonight, they felt like strangers. She could have walked away, could have pretended she didn't hear them, but she didn't. Claudine turned on her heel, walked straight over, and planted herself right in front of them. The group fell silent. "You got something you want to say to me?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp enough to slice through steel. The men shifted uncomfortably, looking at each other like they were waiting for someone else to step up first. Finally, the tallest Onia man named Rick Daly, who used to sit 2 pews behind her every Sunday, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Freeman," he started, "we didn't mean—" "Don't lie," Claudine snapped. "You meant every word." Rick swallowed hard but didn't back down. "Look, we just think this whole thing's gotten a little out of hand. Chasey made a mistake, sure. But you're turning the whole town against itself. Claudine felt her jaw tighten, but she refused to lower her voice. You think I turned this town upside down? She asked, her voice rising. You think I asked for a pack of grown men to surround me and threaten me in broad daylight? The men glanced around nervously, like they wished they could disappear into the floor. You weren't there, Claudine continued. You didn't hear what they said. You didn't see how far they were willing to go. You didn't feel that man's hand on my necklace. You didn't see that knife aimed at my dog's throat. Her voice cracked for just a moment, but she caught herself before it broke all the way. You think this is about pride? About attention? Let me tell you something. I don't want any of this, but I'm not going to sit back and let them get away with it. Not for me. Not for anyone who comes after me. Rick's face flushed with something between shame and anger. Mrs. Freeman, he said quietly, you don't understand how this town works. You don't make it better by dragging it through court. Claudine leaned in, lowering her voice to a razor's edge. No, I understand exactly how this town works. That's why I'm doing it. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel, walked straight to the register, and paid for her things without looking back. But even as she stepped outside, she could feel the weight of every eye in that store burning into her back. That night, Claudine sat on the porch again, Valor's head resting on her lap. She stroked his fur, trying to settle the storm building in her chest. You hear what they said, boy? She whispered. They're scared. But they don't even know what they're really scared of. Valor let out a soft huff, as if he understood. Claudine glanced out at the quiet street, her jaw set like stone. They should be scared, she muttered, because I'm not done yet. And deep down, she knew the real fight was just beginning. The next morning, Claudine didn't even have a chance to pour her first cup of coffee before the phone rang again. She glanced at the screen. Rachel Cole. She answered on the second ring. Morning, Deputy. Rachel didn't waste any time. I need you to come down to the station. Marcos wants to go over the trial prep, and something else came up. Claudine's stomach tightened. What happened now? Rachel sighed on the other end. We found Wyatt and Zeke. Claudine froze. Found them? Rachel's voice dropped. We picked them up late last night. They were hiding out at one of Wyatt's uncle's old fishing cabins. They didn't put up a fight, but they've lawyered up. Claudine felt her pulse quicken. And Chase? Rachel hesitated. He's still out, but we're closing in. Marcos wants to explain in person. 20 minutes later, Claudine was back in that same worn-out chair in Marcos Villanueva's office. Rachel leaned against the door, arms crossed, while Marcos spread out a stack of documents across the desk. Claudine sat forward, her nerves raw. You said you found Wyatt and Zeke, but Chase is still out there. Marcos nodded slowly. We're close, Mrs. Freeman. We've got a warrant out. We've got his truck on every watch list in the county. He won't stay hidden for long. Claudine wasn't so sure. Men like him always seem to find a way to slip through the cracks. Marcos leaned forward, his voice low. Not this time. He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward her. This is the official trial schedule. Jury selection starts next week. Opening statements 2 days after that. Claudine stared at the paper, the weight of it settling on her chest like a stone. It's really happening, she whispered. Marcos nodded. It's happening. And I'll be honest with you. The defense is already playing dirty. Claudine raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Marcos seethed. They're pushing a narrative that this was all a misunderstanding, that the boys never meant to hurt you, that they were just playing around, and you overreacted. Claudine's jaw locked tight. Of course they are. Marcos leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. They're trying to frame you as angry, overdramatic, trying to make a name for yourself. Claudine laughed, cold and sharp. Funny, that's exactly what Chase did when he put his hands on me. Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady. They can try to spin it however they want, but the footage doesn't lie. Claudine nodded slowly, but she could feel the familiar ache rising in her throat again. The ache of knowing people would believe whatever made them feel the most comfortable. And the truth? The truth wasn't comfortable for folks in this town. Marcos tapped the paperwork in front of him. Your testimony is the backbone of this case, Mrs. Freeman. You stay steady on that stand, and they don't stand a chance. Claudine looked him dead in the eye. I've stood steady my whole life, Mr. Villanueva. This won't be any different. Marcos gave a slow nod, respect flickering in his tired expression. Good, because there's one more thing. He slid another file across the desk. Claudine opened it and froze. A photo, grainy, black and white. But clear enough, Chase Grady, standing in front of a bar on the other side of the county, his truck parked right out front. "We got this an hour ago," Marcos explained. "He's holed up at that bar most nights. We've got plainclothes watching him." Waiting for the right moment, Claudine swallowed hard. "Why wait?" Marcos sighed. "Because if we pick him up too soon, it could tip the defense off. We're building the case for maximum impact. We need the jury to see the full picture." Rachel cut in softly. "It's risky, but it's the best shot we've got." Claudine leaned back in her chair, rubbing her hands together like she was trying to warm them. "Let me guess. You want me to keep living like I'm not being hunted?" Neither of them answered. They didn't have to. She already knew. Claudine stood slowly, her voice calm but sharp as glass. "You catch him before someone else gets hurt," she whispered. Marcos nodded. "I promise." By the time Claudine got home that evening, her nerves were stretched thin. She sat on the porch with Valor again, staring down that same dark street, wondering how many more nights she'd have to sit like this waiting. And that's when she made her decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to sit inside while the town picked sides. Tomorrow, she was going to walk that neighborhood again, head high, shoulders back. Because if Chase Grady wanted to find her, he wouldn't have to look very far. And when the time came, she'd be ready. So would Valor. And the whole damn town was about to find out Claudine Freeman wasn't finished fighting. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Claudine laced up her walking shoes like she'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, it wasn't about routine. It wasn't about clearing her head or stretching her legs. This was a message to Chase, to the town, to herself. She clipped Valor's leash, grabbed Raymond's dog tags from the hook by the door, and draped them around her neck like armor. She didn't care who saw. She wanted them to see. As she stepped out onto the porch, the neighborhood felt heavier than usual. Windows she used to see open in the morning now stayed shut. Curtains barely parted as she passed. It didn't matter. She kept walking. Valor trotted close, his body tense but steady, like he understood the weight of every step. When she reached Pelican Drive, she paused. This was the same stretch of street where Mason had appeared out of the shadows. The same street where that black pickup had crept by just days before. She felt Valor's body shift first. His nose lifted toward the breeze. His tail went still. Something was wrong. Claudine scanned the street, her heart picking up speed. And then she saw them. Two figures ducking behind a stack of old lobster traps by the bait shop. Claudine's blood turned to ice. She gripped Valor's leash tighter. "Easy, boy," she whispered. But Valor's growl rumbled deep in his chest like a warning shot. She took a slow step forward. Then another, and that's when they bolted. Two men, sprinting toward the edge of the dock like they were being chased by the devil himself. Wyatt and Zeke, cowards running again. But Valor didn't wait for permission this time. His body lunged forward, snapping the leash from Claudine's hand like it was nothing. His paws hit the ground hard as he tore after them, his bark cutting through the air like thunder. Claudine ran after him, her heart slamming in her chest. "Valor, stop them!" The men split, Wyatt veering left toward the marina parking lot, Zeke scrambling toward the old fish shack at the end of the dock. Valor didn't hesitate, he chose Zeke. The young man let out a terrified yelp as Valor closed the distance, leaping onto his back and taking him to the ground with a heavy thud. "Get off me! Somebody help!" Zeke shrieked, flailing like a fish on dry land. Claudine reached them just as Zeke tried to kick Valor off. But the dog wasn't biting. Not yet. He just stood over the man, growling so deep it vibrated through the wooden planks. "Call him off!" Zeke cried, tears already streaming down his face. Claudine stood over them, chest heaving. "Where's Chase?" she demanded. Zeke shook his head frantically. "I don't know! I swear!" Valor barked once, sharp and loud. Claudine leaned in closer. "You tell me where he is," she hissed, "or you'll wish I left him off the leash." Zeke sobbed, clutching his hands to his head. She's hiding at Mason's uncle's boat shed, out on the south end near the mangroves." Claudine's blood ran cold. "Valor, back." The dog stepped off Zeke but didn't stop growling. Claudine grabbed her phone and called Rachel. "We've got Zeke," she said as soon as Rachel answered. "And I've got something you need to hear." Within minutes, sirens echoed through the air again. Rachel's cruiser pulled up fast, lights flashing. She jumped out, rushing toward them. "What happened?" Claudine pointed to Zeke, still crumpled on the dock. He gave up Chase's location. Rachel cuffed the man without hesitation, reading him his rights as she dragged him toward the cruiser. As Zeke was loaded into the back seat, Claudine turned to Rachel. "Mason's uncle's boat shed," she repeated. "That's where Chase is hiding." Rachel's face darkened. "Stay here," she ordered. "I'm bringing backup." But Claudine grabbed her arm. "No," she said firmly. "Not this time. I'm going with you." Rachel started to argue, but Claudine cut her off. "He's been hunting me for days, Rachel. This ends with me standing there when you take him down." Rachel stared at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Sweet up, Mrs. Freeman. It's time." As they drove toward the south end of town, Claudine could feel her heartbeat pounding like a drum in her ears. Valor sat in the back seat, panting softly. His eyes locked on the road ahead like he already knew the fight wasn't finished. And neither did she. They were going to end this. Together. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every turn, every mile. Claudine could feel it building inside her like something tightening around her chest, daring her to break before they got there. But she didn't break. Rachel drove fast, calling for backup as they barreled toward the far edge of the island where the mangroves swallowed the shoreline. The old boat shed Mason's uncle owned had been abandoned for years. Everyone in town knew that. It was the perfect place for a coward like Chase Grady to hole up and wait for the dust to settle. But the dust wasn't settling. It was coming for him. Rachel pulled the cruiser off the main road and onto a dirt path surrounded by towering trees. Claudine could see the shed up ahead half collapsed, weather-beaten, and crooked like it was barely holding itself together. A single pickup truck was parked outside. Chase's truck. Rachel cut the engine, turning to Claudine. "You stay here. Let me clear it first." Claudina didn't move. "I'm going with you," she whispered. Rachel opened her mouth to argue again, but one look at Claudine's face told her it wasn't worth it. Claudine had earned her place in this fight. She wasn't about to sit on the sidelines now. Rachel nodded once. "Stay close to me, and whatever happens, keep Valor on a tight leash." Claudine clipped the leash to Valor's collar and stepped out of the car, her heart pounding so loud she swore Chase could hear it from inside that shed. They moved in slow, careful. Rachel's hand hovered over her weapon, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. And then, the door creaked open. Chase stepped out, hands in his pockets. No fear on his face, no shame in his eyes. Just that same smug grin she'd seen on the dock the night it all started. "Well, well," he drawled, looking right past Rachel and locking eyes with Claudine. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Rachel raised her voice, sharp as a blade. "Don't move, Grady. Hands where I can see them." Chase didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pulled his hands out of his pockets, raising them just high enough to make a show of it. "Look at this," he sneered. "The hero herself, bringing her lapdog to finish the job." Claudine took a step forward, Valor pressing tight against her leg, growling low and steady. "This is over, Chase," she said, her voice like stone. "You lost." Chase laughed at a bitter, ugly sound. "You think this is over?" he spat. "This town doesn't give a damn what happens to you. You're just a headline, a pity story." Rachel took another step forward, her voice cold. "Turn around, hands on your head, now." But Chase didn't move. "You think they're gonna put me away for this?" he snapped. "You think some jury's gonna believe you over me?" Claudine felt her jaw clench so tight it hurt. "They already do," she whispered. Chase's face twisted with rage. His hand jerked toward his belt too fast, too aggressive. Rachel didn't hesitate. Down. Her weapon was drawn in a flash. Chase froze mid-motion, breathing hard. His eyes darted between the two women, weighing his chances. Claudine tightened her grip on Valor's leash. "Don't," she warned. Chase slowly raised his hands again. But this time, there was no grin, no swagger, just hate. Rachel moved in, cuffing his wrists with brutal efficiency. "You're done, Grady," she growled. Claudine stood frozen for a moment, staring at the man who had haunted her every step for weeks. The man who had tried to steal her dignity, tried to make her small. But standing there now, cuffed like the coward he was, Chase looked smaller than ever. As Rachel led him toward the cruiser, Chase turned over his shoulder one last time. "This ain't the end," he hissed. "You'll see." Claudine didn't even blink. "No," she replied softly. "It's the beginning." The trial started 5 days later. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled. Locals, outsiders, reporters who smelled blood in the water. Claudine sat in the front row next to Marcos, her hands folded tight in her lap. Valor wasn't allowed inside the courtroom, but she could feel him with her anyway. Every breath, every heartbeat. He was still there, steady as ever. The defense tried their best. They painted Chase and his crew as good boys from good families, claimed it was all just a misunderstanding, a prank gone wrong. They called Claudine dramatic, combative, even tried to suggest she had exaggerated the whole thing to get attention. But the footage didn't lie. The jury watched every second of Insolent and Still. They saw the truck, the threats, the moment Chase lunged, the moment Valor knocked him to the ground. And then it was Claudine's turn. She took the stand with her head held high. She told them everything, every word, every fear. Every moment she stood on that dock, knowing no one was coming to save her except the dog standing by her side. Her voice never wavered. Not once. When Marcos asked her what she felt in that moment, surrounded by 4 grown men who wanted to take from her because they thought she didn't matter, Claudine took a deep breath and looked the jury dead in the eye. "I felt alive," she whispered, "and I knew I wasn't done fighting." The courtroom held its breath. When she stepped down, she caught Chase staring at her. But this time, there was no fire in his eyes, just fear. Because deep down, he knew it too. She wasn't finished. The courtroom was so silent you could have heard a pin drop. Claudine sat with her hands folded, staring straight ahead, as Judge Reynolds called the court back into session. The jury had been gone for hours, and now they were filing back in, their faces unreadable, their steps slow and measured. Everyone leaned in, everyone held their breath. Claudina didn't blink. The 4-persona woman in her early 60s, the kind who looked like she'd raised 4 kids and didn't have time for nonsense, stood up with the verdict slip in hand. Her voice rang through the courtroom like a bell. "In the case of the state versus Chase Grady, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." A wave of gasps swept through the crowd, some quiet cheers, some shocked whispers, some angry murmurs from the back of the room. But Claudine heard none of it. All she heard was the sound of her own heart finally slowing down. Guilty. They said it, out loud, in front of the whole town. It wasn't just Chase. The 4-person kept reading. Guilty for Mason Burke. Guilty for Wyatt Crowley. Guilty for Zeke Landry. Every single one of them. Judge Reynolds nodded solemnly and called for sentencing to proceed immediately. Marcos stood tall, requesting the maximum penalty for Chase and the others, reminding the court that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern of intimidation, a pattern of abuse, a pattern of believing they could do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted. The defense stuttered through their arguments for leniency, but nobody in that room believed it anymore. Not after everything they'd heard. Not after everything they'd seen. Judge Reynolds cleared her throat, her voice calm but heavy like a stone dropping into still water. "Chase Grady, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8. Chase flinched like he'd been slapped. His bravado shattered right there at the defense table. "Mason Burke, Wyatt Crowley, Zeke Landry, each of you is sentenced to 10 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 6. Claudine watched as the deputies moved in, cuffing them one by one. None of them looked at her. Not a single one. Until Chase, as they hauled him toward the exit, he turned, locking eyes with her one last time. His mouth twisted like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just stared, shoulders slumped, beaten for the first time in his life. And Claudine? She didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because this time, the town had spoken for her. She left the courthouse with Marcos and Rachel flanking her on either side. A small crowd had gathered on the steps, neighbors, reporters, strangers holding up their phones. Some clapped quietly. Some stood with their arms crossed. Some just watched, saying nothing. Claudine ignored them all. She spotted Valor waiting in Rachel's cruiser, his tail wagging the second he saw her. She opened the door, and he jumped out, pressing his body against her legs like he already knew she'd won. Rachel placed a hand on Claudine's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. Claudine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "No, we did," Rachel nodded, stepping back to let Claudine and Valor have their moment. Claudine leaned down, pressing her forehead to Valor's enidly down. "You saved me, boy," she whispered. Again, later that night, she sat on her porch, staring out over the street that had once felt like enemy territory. Tonight, it felt like home again. She watched as cars passed. Some drivers nodded, some didn't. She didn't care anymore. Valor lay beside her, finally relaxed, his breathing slow and steady. For the first time in weeks, the street felt quiet in a way that wasn't threatening. It felt finished. Claudine closed her eyes, listening to the soft hum of the night. It had taken everything she had, every ounce of courage, every piece of fight left in her. But she'd done it. She had stood her ground, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to stay small. And in the end, she proved them all wrong. As she stood to head inside, she took one last look at the dark street, then down at Valor. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "We've got living to do." And together, they stepped back inside their home, leaving fear behind, and walking straight into the peace they had fought so hard to earn. Sometimes in life, standing up for yourself feels like standing alone. But the truth is, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to face that fear when everything in you says walk away. Claudine Freeman's story reminds us that dignity isn't something anyone can give or take. It's something you claim for yourself every single day, no matter your age, no matter your background, and maybe you've been in that place before, where people underestimate you, where the world tries to tell you you're too old, too tired, or too small to make a difference. But here's what Claudine showed us: there's a quiet power in refusing to back down. There's strength in standing your ground, not just for yourself, but for those watching who may not have found their voice yet. So wherever you are tonight, whether you're 60, 70, or 80 years old, remember this: it's never too late to stand tall. It's never too late to prove that you matter. And it's never, ever too late to fight for what's right. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one.